Hello buddy, it's Wyvern here, back with a video to talk about the news. And boy is there a lot of news to talk about. Last DLC for Total War Warhammer 2, or last I should say Lord Pack DLC for Warhammer 2 has been announced, and alongside it a bunch of free DLC. The Beastmen finally getting a facelift. The faction everyone's been asking for to get some love for ages is finally getting that love. The Lizardmen also getting some improvements, and perhaps more importantly, the dwarves are actually getting some love as well with the free LC editions and some general editions coming in with ogres and the like. So I'm going to try to run through this as quickly as I can and highlight the most important features being added, but certainly feel free to add anything you feel I missed or anything that any additional information that you feel is worth sharing down in the comments below. So, of course, first and foremost, the highlight of this DLC, Taurox the Brass Bull, and he's coming in with Beastmen who are getting a bunch of monsters who were worth many Charlemagnes. Against them, Oxiotl for the Lizardmen, coming in with more monsters, including some we haven't really seen before and weren't really much seen on tabletop. So, definitely some fun additions there. They are coming in with their own campaigns on the Vortex map, and, of course, in Mortal Empires, getting their own unique objectives separate from the usual gather a bunch of scrolls or warpstone to stop the vortex. So they're not connected to the vortex ritual. We've already seen this sort of taking place with prior Lord packs, of course. So this is not necessarily a new policy or new approach, but nice to see regardless. Taurox himself is trying to complete multiple chaos rituals to sate the dark gods and gain their approval, and trying to find the Heart of Dark. So that makes for a campaign goal for him. That gives him his objective, and it gives him a reason to ransack all of Nagarond and destroy everyone in his path. Oxiotl, on the flip side, is trying to stop him, and that is his goal. And to do that, he does need to revive some sanctums around the world to restore the he needs to restore the Sun Sanctums and gain enough power to stop Taurox. So it gives both of these characters a set of objectives. In practice, I think you might be able to obviously beat the target faction pretty quickly, given that the two start super close to each other. They both start up in Nagarond, but it does give them something fun to look forward to, something to fight for in the long run, especially in Vortex at least. And obviously in Mortal Empires, things might be a bit different depending on where exactly you're spawning, because so far we've seen, as far as I'm aware, only seen the Vortex spawns for these factions, and they're both up in Nagarond, right next to each other essentially. Now, new units, of course, coming in. We do have the Doom Bull as a lord for the Beastmen, so a fightier, higher end, higher cost character. Alongside that, we've got the Wargore as a hero, so a cheaper budget character than the Gore Bull, I imagine. Comes in, he's got his Mason Shield, probably more of a buff character than a straight combat character. Obviously meant for straight combat, but 2, I think, is not really going to be that superb. Probably more in line with some of the more middling combat characters like an Empire Captain or Paladin. Tuskor Chariot, although the Paladin's obviously is underpriced, so that's why they tend to be strong, but in isolation, it's not that strong of a character. And then the Tuskor Chariot, which probably the most overlooked unit in this DLC. Poor guy. It's just a budget chariot with Vanguard deployment. Cool, I guess, but not as cool as a Gorgon and a Jabberslythe. So, yeah, big, beefy, anti-large monster, able to replenish HP, and yeah, just nasty stuff. It really able to punch above its weight, and able to dish out a lot of hurt. Of course, still flimsy, like all Beastmen tend to be, and that could hamstring it a bit, but it does mean that it does give the Beastmen a unit that can pressure enemy single entities that are sitting up on top of their own infantry much better than before. And then the Jabberslythe, which is able to debuff an area, does bring some leadership debuffs, I believe, has some vortexes, and of course looks absolutely hideous, so a really strong monster. Not sure how they're going to implement its tongue attack, or if they're going to, but a lot of potential for this unit to just be an absolute menace and a behemoth on the battlefield. And of course, this isn't including the free LC editions, which we'll cover in a bit, but we are getting a greater Bray Shaman as well. And there's some changes to existing characters like Malagor. So those actually, I think, might shake things up for Beastmen more than any of these units. I think people are really hyped and focused on the Gorgon and Jabberslythe because they're cool centerpiece monsters. But as far as Beastmen go, the fact that these units are still going to be very lightly armored, and the fact that these units are still going to be let down, essentially, by Beastmen infantry that routes at the drop of a hat, I think is going to prevent them from being sort of crazy powerful. That said, the addition of cheaper caster options, like the Great Bray Shaman, which if we scroll down to the bottom here, we can see we're getting the Bray Shaman, who gets Tuskor and Razor Guard Chariot, and most likely gets the full selection of magic Beastmen get. And then Malagor is now able to fly. With those additions, I think Beastmen those are probably going to be the most meaningful changes for Beastmen. The fact that you now have a reliable, cheap caster option that lets you go super wide, and it lets you flex that faction mobility to the maximum, I think could actually be the biggest game changer for the faction overall. Then for the Lizards, we do have the addition of a Skink Oracle as a hero. This guy is mounted on a Troglodon, and based on the images we've seen, I believe this is simply, he's permanently mounted on Troglodon. He just gets that as a base mount. Oh, sorry there. Makes him strong right off the bat, and gets a mixed lore of magic with, I believe, beasts, fire, life, and heavens. So quite a significant mix. It's explained in more detail on the Steam page, and we'll get there in just a jiffy. Chameleon Stalkers, which are a sort of hybrid melee missile unit, which gets explosive long-range darts. So this unit, given how Chameleon Skinks are, could be really oppressive, could be fairly balanced. If they're really expensive, or the explosive darts really suck against single entities, they might just be, or both of those things, they might just be too expensive to be oppressive. But if those explosive darts are insane and just cleave through chaff, get ready for some annoying... You thought Chameleon Kite was bad, get ready for something far worse. Then you've got the Koal, flying monster, which has a stealth field that it can project on units underneath it, and also can call down spells. So definitely more of a utility flyer, which is interesting because we haven't really seen that from any other faction. The closest thing is probably like the Heil Phoenixes, but even those aren't necessarily utility. Like maybe like the Omen of Assyrian, but even those aren't quite, I feel, in the league of the Koala here, where the Koala is really meant to provide spell support and really meant more to support allies than actually dish out that much hurt on its own, though it is still a fearsome combatant in its own right, I assume. And then the Troglodon, which by all of sort of appearances looks to be a mix of, say, a Carnosaur and a Salamander, getting some anti-large projectiles as well as being a decent melee combatant. So perhaps more like an ancient Salamander, but with an anti-large specialization. But we'll see how exactly it pans out in gameplay later down the road. Now, of course, here we are seeing the unique mechanics being added. Tarox, of course, does get momentum, which allows him to potentially rampage throughout multiple settlements or get through multiple battles in a single turn, which is pretty cool. Of course, Oxiatel, and both of them are starting all the way up in Nagaron. So Tagaron, which was already a bit of a Thunderdome, already a bit of a cluster, and alongside Lustria, probably one of the most cramped areas on the map, is now going to be even more so with these two new additions. Now, scrolling further down, we do get Beastmen getting an update, the Herdstone. So this is probably one of the biggest campaign changes, I would say, for this campaign, is that the Beastmen now actually can set up a temporary encampment. I think this will make them more forgiving for new players. It gives you a second chance potentially if you get wrecked. It does also mean that you can sort of stay and replenish somewhere. It lets you retain your momentum a little bit without having to rely on the kind of annoying moon mechanics, hopefully. And yeah, just gives them a little bit more sustainability, and hopefully it revamps exactly how Beastmen play out, makes them a little bit more forgiving and a little bit more of a user-friendly faction, because they really haven't been that for a really long time, or really ever. For the dwarves, on the dwarven side of things, we are getting Thorek as the new free LC character. He's coming in with a bunch of his own unique mechanics. He's going to be available in the Vortex campaign. He's going to be in Lustria, so I just talked about how Lustria is a clustered mess, so make it even more of a mess at Thorek. And so he's going to be in there. And he's getting new rune magic and new abilities. But there's also a rework of the rune system, and there's new runes for the dwarves. So each lord is now going to have unique legendary grudges, which is kind of interesting. And we're also getting a improvement to rune magic. So before, runes were basically just abilities. That's all there's to say. They were abilities. Now, though, they're more like magic, where they've got overcast versions. But rather than having a wind of magic cost, they do, in fact, rather than having a wind of magic cost, runes now share a cooldown. So you cast one, and then you can't cast any other rune for 60 seconds. So I believe it's a 60-second internal cooldown and 120-second per rune cooldown. So you can't just spam runes. You can't just bring one rune and spam it nonstop. And you can't spam all your runes nonstop. So it's not like Empire Battle Prayers. And I'm kind of not sure if Empire Battle Prayers will get the same rework as well. But this should definitely make it balanced while simultaneously keeping it flavorful. The new runes, from what I've seen, really do spice things up. They give you more mobility. They give you more melee attack. They give you more, of course, survivability still. But you've also got runes that actually do damage again, stuff like that. It's really cool to see all the new stuff runes are able to do. And then for craftable runes, you're now able to make runes that make projectiles home in. You're able to make runes that buff up bonus versus large on certain missiles that make units more resistant to damage. Your characters can actually carry multiple runes, so you've essentially got extra item slots on your characters, which you can use to upgrade their resistances, their combat stats. So really, really, really cool stuff there for the dwarves, and finally becoming more of the faction I feel they should have been from the start. Really, finally getting that Dawi feel. And finally, we already did mention the Great Brave Shaman, but we are getting Ogre Mercs, and that's a addition I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting ogres to make a sort of entrance until at best the pre-order DLC for Warhammer 3, and really I was kind of anticipating them to be a Warhammer 3 DLC. But we're actually getting them as a handful of them as a free mercenary option that you get with Total War Access. So you're going to be able to recruit the ogres as any faction, and we're going to cover that in just a little bit. But yeah, you're going to be able to cover those guys or recruit those guys and use them to fill out any roster holes you might have. Finally, yeah, what do you get? You basically get what you pay for. The usual Beastmen, or the usual DLC policy. If you bought Silence and the Fury, you get Tower Rocks. If you got, and of course Oxial. If you all had the existing Beastmen DLC, you get Kazrak, Malak, or Morgur. All of those will get updated as a faction, but you only get the characters and units you paid for. So yeah, I think that should be no surprise, really. But that is how it is. Moving on to the Steam page. The Steam page is nice just because it gives us some images, and it does give us some sneak peeks of the Regiments of Renown. So, of course, Tower Rock's looking handsome over here, screaming at some skinks. The Koalas looking really awesome, just soaring over top. And you can see the Jabber Slice down here on ground level, sliding out the Korgan over there. Troglodons, which I'm not sure, it kind of looks like these guys might actually come in units of 3. I'm not sure if that's going to be a thing or not, or if there's just 3 of them here. But we'll see how that pans out exactly. Some of those skink stalkers here with their war mauls and blow darts, so going to be shooting some explosives. Oxial about to face down a Korkan. Holy hell, look at that beast. Just monstrous. Jabber Slythe, the Doombull, the Wargorge, just looking at the full selection of monstrosities coming in. The Skink Oracle on his Troglodon here. And yeah, the start position. So this is actually interesting just because it gives us an idea, I think, of how difficult these starts might be. Tower Rocks seems to be an easy mode start. I'm going to be straightforward here. You get your Shielded Minotaur. So you get a Gorgon, you get Tower Rocks himself, and you do get a Brave Shaman, which is an insane lineup of units, in my opinion. It's going to be an easy early campaign, I think. You could fill this roster out with absolute garbage infantry, grind your way up to better stuff. But in the meantime, you do have some super strong options to Vile Tide thrown in with like Taurox and a Minotaur, in my opinion, should be more than enough to manhandle most of the early game stuff you need to deal with. Taurox also looking absolutely awesome there. In the meantime, for Oxial, well, that looks a lot tougher. A bunch of skinks in your starting army. Now, granted, you are getting Skink Oracle with a Troglodon, so that's pretty cool, and that's pretty nifty. It does mean you're going to have a terror-causing monster. You're going to have some magic early on. That's good, of course. but bunch of skinks. And an early game where you need to fight some sizable armies sometimes, skinks don't dish out the hurt you need. They suck. Their ammo capacity doesn't tend to be big enough for long games. They're solid in multiplayer where everyone's limited on funds, but in a campaign where they often need to dish out a lot of hurt, they just don't have the ammo for it. And in melee, they suck, so you can't count on them. So I think this could be a concerning start. This could be difficult. Obviously, we don't know just how strong the magic will be on the Oracle here. Maybe your opponents here will be really easy. Maybe it's just going to be Norskins early on or something. Oxiatel, maybe he's super OP. Not sure. But this starting roster is a little concerning. Might need those explosive dart boys to really carry their weight there. To carry the day for you. Scrolling down, we do get, once again, a similar rundown to what we saw before. Slightly different detailing on what exactly we might expect. An AoE damage vortex and poison from the Jabber Slice, so that's pretty cool. The ability to regen some health for the Gorgon. Really, really nifty, I think. And we see the regiments around. So 3 of them. The Grog Hooves of Wolf's Run. Centaur Throwing Axes with Poison and Regen. So this unit, unless it's insanely expensive, is going to be, I think, a staple pick. Centaur Throwing Axes are already a core core Beastman unit. You see them all the time. So give them regen, give them poison, and you're gonna see them like every game, I imagine. Now, underneath that, we do have the Forebear Gland Broodmother, a legendary Jabberslide with armor sundering and regular attacks. On its regular attacks, and an AP Vortex. This I see more as a niche option. You're going to get some mob clear, which is nice. Armor Sundering should synergize well with Ungor Raiders, but getting on top of the targets you want with even a single entity is not easy necessarily. So you can't guarantee you're going to get the targets sundered that you want sundered. But also throw this on top of some Gores, and you can make your Gores punch a lot better. You can make your Cal Spawn punch a lot better. So there will be some synergies there, I believe. And finally, the Bloodbrute Behemoth, which is a legendary Gorgon, which does more damage to low health enemies. So kind of like Snitch, which should make it a good unit for hunting key targets. Obviously, still suffering that weakness, and this is one of those things I think people are underestimating. It's still going to be suffering from low armor and low survivability. That's something people I think are underestimating with Beastmen. Just how the fact that most of these new units, except like actual Tower Rocks, still going to be suffering from the usual vulnerabilities of a very low armor, and still suffering from the fact that the infantry supporting you is trash, or has trash leadership. They're just going to rout the moment they get pressured heavily, which tends to be what lets Beastmen down. So I think it's something to keep in mind here with the Bloodbrute Behemoth, that even though these units might look really impressive, ultimately how well they can synergize with the existing Beastmen infantry is a question, is up in the air. That is definitely a question that needs answering. Scrolling down, we do have Oxiatel. We do learn a little bit more. We do actually learn a little bit more about Oxiatel's unique mechanic here. So he can actually fast travel between Silent Sanctums, kind of like the Sisters can, I guess, or kind of like Wood Elves can right now between different woods around the map. And yeah, so he gets some certain degree of fast travel, and once again, he does need to fight that final battle against Tower Rocks. He gets the Skink Oracle Mount, who gets some mixed lore. Now, depending on what spells exactly we get here, this could be an instant meta pick, just because if you get like a Fireball and Earthblood, yeah, that's just going to make this guy an instant meta pick. But obviously, it depends on what exact spells we're getting from each lore here. But I could definitely see the Skink Oracle here just synergizing super well with like Krokgar or Sarsh Oldblood or units like that, being able to provide support that you otherwise cannot give them, while still getting items like the Hand of the Gods. You still get items. Like, can you imagine a Fireball spammer plus Hand of the Gods? Oh, that's disgusting. Or getting the Horn of Kygor plus support from Lore of Life. Could be really, really potent stuff. And could really start enabling things like Lizardmen cavalry play, in my opinion, which we don't see too often. Underneath that, Chameleon Stalkers, which we already saw, a bit of a hybrid infantry with explosive darts. Coatl, stealths units, and can cast spells. And the Troglodyte, which, anti-large monster. More importantly, the Regiments of Renown. We've got the Pale Death, which is a Regiment of Renown Feral Troglodyte, which gets the Primeval Roar. Depending on how expensive this is, it could be good. If it's not too much more expensive than a Troglodon and you want to fit a Troglodon in your army, this could be great. If it's super pricey for this ability, probably not. Geltbloom's Terror. This, I think, is a fun potential unit because it's a Carnosaur with Vanguard, no Rampage, and Strider. So Lizardmen already have a massive lineup of Vanguarding units. You've got the Pop Hope Pack cohort, the Regiment of Renowned Spear Riders. You're about to have Oxyotl. You've got Chameleon Skinks. You've got Pterodons. You've got Ripperdactyls. You've had Tic-Tac-Toe. Just a plethora of units. So now I can imagine you bring in like a Skink Oracle. If he's got a single healing spell, whether Regrowth or Earthblood, he can support you super well. And suddenly you can also bring Geltbloom's Terror. You can also bring Chameleon Stalkers, and you've got a really, really nasty Vanguard force. Could even be oppressive, and should certainly make for some fun strategies. And finally, we do have the Spirit of Teapot, which is a legendary Coatl with Shield of Thorns and Banishment. So some really strong potential units here. That said, I'm not sure I see anything OP here but it depends on pricing. I think a lot of it depends on pricing. A lot of it depends on exact implementation. Some of these units could be absolutely disgusting. Some of them, they could be fine. For example, the Chameleon Stalkers. If they have a bunch of ammo and they fire exploding darts and just wipe your infantry, that will be hideous. But on the flip side, if they kind of suck against single entities and they're really expensive, it might not be that much of a problem. They do, after all, lose their poison of their Blow Dart Cannon. You are limited on 360 units, so they might be, in some ways, easier to counter. Now, moving on to the free LC shenanigans. Ogre Mercs being added. Nice sneak peek of what we can expect. Whenever you raise and sack a settlement or have a big battle, Ogres will pop up, and you can recruit them. And they're going to be a good, especially early game, I think, filler for factions. A unit that that's better than your basic troops, and when you don't have skills and tech invested in your troops, Ogres will be better. So they can sort of be a temporary fix, but probably not a unit you want to hold on to into late game, because in late game with tech and skills, these units probably will not have their own tech and skills going for them, so why would you want to keep them around? But they also do give us a glimpse of what Ogres will look like, with a unique mechanic that lets them halve enemy charge defense, or really, they still get half their charge bonus, even if an enemy has charge defense active. So that's pretty cool to see. A nice, I think, flavorful balance between making Ogres too oppressive by just negating charge bonus or charge defense, but simultaneously allowing them to retain some of that initial punch and weight that you would expect of an Ogre charge. It's supposed to be their big thing, is an Ogre charge. Now for variants, though, we do have a vanilla Mace variant at 550 gold, I believe, so really pretty cheap monstrous infantry. Low armor, fairly low combat stats, mostly just about the charge bonus, but I think a cool unit regardless. And then dual weapons. So you get anti-infantry variant. These guys do give you siege attacker. They do give you fear. So for factions like Empire or Dwarves who don't normally have access to that stuff, Bretonnia, they don't get early access to these sorts of abilities. I guess Brets and Dwarves do get artillery, at least for siege attacker, but you don't get fear really. It's a nice gimmick to have. And then you get Ogre Maneaters, who give you essentially a free company militia with AP pistols. And then you get great weapons. So you've got an anti-large variant. So if you're missing anti-large punch, if you're missing missiles, or especially AP missiles, boom, you can recruit some with the Ogre Maneaters. And I do feel, and then a similar thing with the Morn Fat Cavalry. These guys do have a really low model count. I believe 9 models on large. So really, really low model count. But a punchy, decently armored, unlike normal Ogres who seem to only have about 40 armor. These guys actually have like 90, I believe. So reasonably tanky, AP, super heavy cav. For a lot of factions, if you're missing a unit in one of these categories, these guys will be a nice filler. You can get some anti-infantry coverage. You can get some anti-large coverage. You can get AP missile pressure. I feel like this will be the most common pick in campaigns just because missiles are so strong. But just being able to get filler for things you lack is nice. And especially in campaign. Now in multiplayer, you're not going to have access to these in quick battle. Probably means you're not going to have access to them in most tournaments. Most rule sets probably won't allow it, but in some unique rule tournaments where they're more like lax or just looking to have more fun laid back tournament scenario, or perhaps just for fun friendly games, these guys will still be available and will make, I think, for some fun themed battles. And finally, we do have Thorek being added, and unique legendary rune lord. This guy will be spawning in Lustria, so making the Lustrian Thunderdome even more crowded. He does, of course, get a unique mechanic where he collects ancestral relics, and these are pretty insane from what I've seen. They give you stuff like essentially a roided up regrowth. You can get abilities that literally make units invulnerable to damage for a period of time, things like that. Ability to get ghost ancestors, that sort of stuff. And of course, alongside that, we are getting that dwarf rework. So besides all the new, and besides the fact that Thoric is going to be super strong at casting a plethora of runes because he's got a cooldown reduction in melee, the fact that he's got his Anvil of Doom literally forces casters, and this is, I think it's true for all Anvils of Doom, it literally makes casters miscast if they're within a certain range of him. So it's a nice change from the previous plus 15% magic resist, just making casters miscast. It's pretty neat. So Thoric's got that going for him. But on top of that, we're getting Dwarf Engineers can now reload ammo. Of course, runes have been reworked, as mentioned earlier. You get a plethora of new rune options just to buff up your units and buff up your characters. So really, it's looking to be a pretty fun addition here, and could be a challenging little campaign to play as dwarves, because fighting lizardmen is one of the few factions I feel in early game that can really give dwarves a tough time. But regardless, we're definitely looking awesome. Dropping in alongside the Silence and the Fury come July 14th. Should be a good, fun unit. And that is it. A bit of a lengthy video here covering the additions coming in for the Dawi and the ogres and the lizardmen, and of course, most importantly, the beastmen. What do you guys think? In my opinion, this is the best DLC we've had in a little while now. And actually, I'd say a little while, but I'd say a while now. It's definitely been. I think I'm not sure if I'd say it's better than the Punch, but it definitely. I'm more excited for this one than the prior DLC. And I think it's honestly one of the best DLCs we've gotten in Warhammer 2 period. I definitely think it is. Lots of exciting new units, lots of exciting new characters, mechanics, reworks for factions that have needed it for ages, finally happening. And I think a nice capstone to just finish off Warhammer 2 and send it off with big before we roll into Warhammer 3, real Warhammer 3 hype, and the whatever the Warhammer pre-order is, Warhammer 3 pre-order is. But certainly let me know what you guys think down below. I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. As usual, I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.